What if I told you that the bloodiest conflict in Europe since World War II started known in 2022, but nearly a decade earlier, with shadows of empire and cries for freedom colliding in a storm that still hasn't ended? This is the complete story of the Ukraine-Russia war. From peaceful protests in Kiev, to the trenches of Bakhmut, from the annexation of Crimea to drone warfare over Moscow. This war has changed Europe, shaken the global order, and rewritten the rules of modern conflict. In this video, we explore how it started, how it unfolded, and where it might be going next. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Ukraine declared independence. Overnight, a nation that had been under Moscow's control for centuries suddenly charted its own path. But independence was not the end of Russia's influence. Ukraine inherited Soviet-era infrastructure, a massive nuclear arsenal, which it gave up in exchange for security assurances under the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, and a deeply divided population. Ukrainian-speaking nationalists in the West and Russian-speaking citizens in the East and South. In November 2013, Ukrainians flooded Kiev's Maidan Nezalezhnosti, Independence Square, after Yanukovych refused to sign an association agreement with the EU. What began as peaceful protests turned into a revolution known as Euromaidan. Over the next 3 months, clashes between protesters and police intensified. More than 100 people were killed. In February 2014, Yanukovych fled to Russia. A new, Western-leaning government took over. Russia saw this as a Western-backed coup. Putin moved swiftly. The 2000s were marked by political instability. The Orange Revolution of 2004, sparked by election fraud, saw pro-Western Viktor Yushchenko come to power, but the country remained in turmoil. In 2010, Viktor Yanukovych, a pro-Russian politician, won the presidency. Under his rule, Ukraine inched closer to Moscow and away from the European Union. In March 2014, Russian troops without insignia, later dubbed Little Green Men, seized Crimea, a Ukrainian peninsula with a majority Russian-speaking population and a key naval base in Sevastopol. A controversial referendum was held, and Russia annexed Crimea, violating international law. The West imposed sanctions, but Putin's popularity soared at home. Ukraine lost a strategic territory without firing a shot. But the real war was just beginning. Pro-Russian separatists in Donetsk and Luhansk, backed by Russian weapons and fighters, declared independence. The Ukrainian army responded. What followed was a brutal, grinding conflict in eastern Ukraine. Thousands were killed. Entire cities were reduced to rubble. Russia denied direct involvement, but was widely believed to be orchestrating the conflict. Two ceasefire agreements, known as Minsk I and Minsk II, were signed in 2014 and 2015. They brought temporary lulls but failed to end the war. Over the next 7 years, the front lines in Donbass remained frozen, but the fighting never stopped. In late 2021, Russian troops began massing along Ukraine's borders. The world watched nervously. On February 24th, 2022, Russia launched a full-scale invasion. Missiles struck Kiev, Kharkiv, and dozens of other cities. Russian forces poured in from the north, east, and south. Putin called it a special military operation to denazify Ukraine. But to the world, it was a war of aggression. Ukrainians resisted fiercely. Civilians made Molotov cocktails. President Volodymyr Zelensky, refusing evacuation offers, declared, "I need ammunition, not a ride." Russia expected Kiev to fall in 72 hours. It didn't. The invasion united the West in ways not seen since the Cold War. NATO strengthened. Germany increased defense spending. Finland and Sweden abandoned neutrality and applied to join NATO. Russia shifted strategy, focusing on the Donbass and southern Ukraine. Cities like Mariupol, Severodonetsk, and Lysychansk became battlegrounds. In the south, Ukraine launched a counteroffensive. In November 2022, it liberated Kherson, the only regional capital Russia had captured. It was a symbolic and strategic blow to Moscow. Both sides suffered heavy losses. Drones, HIMARS rocket systems, and trench warfare defined the battlefield. Civilians continued to suffer amid blackouts and missile strikes. The battle for Bakhmut became a symbol of Ukraine's resistance and Russia's desperation. Months off combat left the city in ruins. The US, EU, and NATO countries poured billions in aid. Tanks, anti-air systems, and eventually fighter jets were promised. China walked a diplomatic tightrope. India bought cheap Russian oil. The global south remained divided. Meanwhile, Russia mobilized hundreds of thousands. Ukraine called for more weapons. The war dragged on. Ukraine began striking deeper into Russian territory using long-range drones. Explosions rocked Moscow. The Kremlin accused the West of enabling the attacks. Cyber warfare, space satellites, and AI-powered targeting changed the nature of modern conflict. Propaganda raged on both sides. Peace talks remained distant. Each side believed it could still win. By mid-2025, the war had killed over 500,000 people. Millions of Ukrainians remained displaced. Entire towns were gone. The world split into blocks. BRICS versus NATO. Sanctions versus self-reliance. Russia deepened ties with China and Iran. Ukraine was fully integrated with the West. No side could claim victory. Yet neither would surrender the biggest challenge. The war has no clear end. It's a conflict where peace seems more dangerous than war, because peace would require compromise, and compromise means political death for leaders on both sides. This isn't just a war over land. It's a war over identity, over spheres of influence, over the post-Cold War world order. It's tested the limits of alliances, the strength of democracy, and the power of propaganda. It's made clear that modern wars are fought on battlefields, in cyberspace, and in the court of public opinion. And yet, amid the rubble, Ukraine stands. Not just resisting, but adapting. The battle for Kyiv, the fall and liberation of Kherson, the siege of Bakhmut, each a turning point. But perhaps the most important moment, Ukraine's refusal to fall. Putin expected surrender. Instead, he sparked a revolution. Ukraine didn't just fight back. It became a symbol of freedom worldwide. From a revolution in 2014 to a global war in 2025, Ukraine's story is one of pain, resilience, and defiance. It is a war not just for territory, but for the soul of a nation. And while no one knows how it ends, one thing is certain: the world will never be the same. To understand why NATO became Russia's red line and how it all led to war, watch our next deep dive right here. It's a story the Kremlin didn't want told.